right. Well, I've never. It's like you started the meeting before we have. Well done. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Mudovnik. I'm going to facilitate today. I'm a professor of materials and society at UCL, and very happy to be asked to do this today because my whole career I've been applying to EPSRC, or I've been dealing with refereeing research proposals. It's like this great uncle or aunt who's overseeing my political. So it's very nice to be able to give something back, or at least to provide at least something back for the community. So I just want to talk very briefly about what's going to happen today. This is an open forum, and it's a chance for the whole science and engineering community, for which EPSRC represents them, and it is also the major funding agency, but at the same time it's also advocating for them to the government and to the public via many different channels. So it's a chance for the whole engineering and science community to really understand better what EPSRC does, and especially the people who run it, and this is the governing board, and who are here today. And this is an incredibly unusual occasion, I think, because it's very hard to get everybody in a room together, and so this is a great opportunity for everyone. And it's not just for the people who've managed to make it down to the Royal Academy of Engineering today, it's also to everybody at their computers now, looking up, because we're live streaming this. So this is a global event, so people who are funded or interested, or the members of the public who want to see how this works, can all tune in, and I hope you are all doing so. So as I mentioned before, the members of the council are here, they're at the front. We've invited people to send in questions and to attend this event, and those people are here gathered together, and of course back home, or in your offices, or wherever you are, at a microscope or a telescope somewhere around the world. And so the programme for the day is roughly as follows. First of all, I'm going to invite Dr. Paul Golby to come up, who's the chair of EPSRC, and he's going to give an opening address to you all. Then we've got two council members, one Jack Boyer and the other Dr. David Watson, and they are going to give you some insight into what it's like to be a council member, the sort of things they have to deal with, and the kinds of roles they play. And then there's questions. So these questions, we've invited everyone to send these questions in advance, and we have a list of them. And where people who are in the audience here today who ask those questions, I'm going to invite you to personally to ask those questions and have the response from the governing body. And all I hope to just remind the governing body is that if you want to answer one of the questions, could you stand up, because it's important that people at home or in their computers or in their offices can see you. And then after we had questions, there was lunch, and there's a sort of initial chance to get some food, obviously important, but then we've got some poster sessions downstairs in which individual council members will be telling you more about what they do. And so your badges all have a colour and a number on them. And I just want you to have a quick look at that now, because when you go downstairs, the first place you go should be your colour, and the second place you go should be the number. And then the third place, there'll be sort of 3 sessions, and we'll try and chivvy you a bit to get you to move around. Will be, something that you haven't seen yet and you want to sort of dip into. And there's going to be poster sessions, as I said, and a surgery session for people who've got particular problems or particular issues they want to talk about. And then we're all going to gather back up here, and we're going to have a plenary session, so some more questions and trying to bring it all together. And the next steps are going to be dealt with by Dave Delpy, who's here. And then that'll be the end of the day. So I hope that's clear, basically, and I would basically like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Paul Golby, and for you to hear what he's got to say. Thank you.
Mark, thanks very much. Let me add my welcome to everybody here today. And maybe a little like Mark, why did I become chair of EPSRC? Well, it's because my PhD was funded by the predecessor of EPSRC. So again, I hope I can put something back into the system. Just a little bit about me. I'm an engineer by background, and until recently I was chief executive of one of the large energy companies called E.ON in the UK. What are we trying to achieve today? Why are we here today? Well, let me share with you a very difficult moment for me. On the day that I became chair of EPSRC, one or two members of our community carried a coffin into number 10 Downing Street with the death of British science written on the banner. And whilst I'm sure nobody in this room was carrying that coffin, and I'm not sure that the views were representative of the community, but nonetheless it caused me and my fellow council members to think, well, why is it that some of the ways in which we're taking decisions are not understood or not accepted by the community? So as a result of that, we really have done two or three things differently. Firstly, I set up a review of how we take strategic advice from within the community, and that's reported back, and we're discussing it again at our council meeting this evening and tomorrow, and shortly we will be saying exactly what changes we're going to make that process more transparent, more open to members of the community. Secondly, we also commissioned a review of how we undertake peer review, and that will be reporting back to council in December, and again we will make that public. And then thirdly, we're organising events such as today, because I guess one of the pieces of feedback I took when I visited an awful lot of universities shortly after taking on the job was that there was a gap between, if you like, the council and active researchers. That, you know, people were not really seeing quite how council was making decisions, what it meant for them, etc. And I guess we were a little perplexed about that initially, because we hold a lot of meetings with universities, but fundamentally we're holding meetings with PVC for research or other people, if I can call it, in the management strata of the universities. And what we wanted to do today was to really try and cut through and talk and engage with active researchers, so that we're here very much in listening mode. So we want to hear from you, obviously what you're doing, but your concerns, your comments on how we organise things, and to hopefully also explain from our perspective how we're reaching some of the decisions we're taking and what we're doing on your behalf in advocating science in terms of public spending. And just a few moments on that, if I may. We've just submitted our proposal for the current spending review, and I think on a granular level, science has been successful. That we have achieved a flat cash settlement across science. You might say, well, that's not a very good result because that's going backwards in real terms. Yes, it is, but science was in the top 3 of the funding areas for the government in the last spending review. So only 2 areas did actually better than science. An awful lot of areas did considerably worse. So I think within the macro argument, I think the politicians are understanding the benefit of science to the nation. What we now have to do, of course, is to win the micro case, because we have to pitch for our fair share, or I might say unfair share, of the science budget for engineering and physical sciences. I think we are doing a good job at selling that case. We're very much aligned with the growth agenda, with the industrial strategy, but we've got to keep on telling those stories, telling politicians what we're doing, how we're achieving, and what impact that's having on the overall nation, be it economic or other aspects of our national life. So that's something that we're actively engaged in, And we need your help, because we can, if you like, integrate the stories into a book, but you're the people who have got to provide us with the individual success stories so we can keep going back to the government and demonstrating what a fantastic impact all you people are making. But let me just stop there. I'm really not here to talk to you, but to listen, and that's what I want to get out of today. So please engage with us, raise questions, raise concerns. Even if we're doing something good, tell us that as well. I mean, we sometimes like a little bit of praise as well. But most of the council of EPSRC are here sitting in the first few tables. So please take every opportunity during the day, over lunch, and in any breakouts to really ask council members about what they're doing and how some of your ideas can input into our work. So let me wish you all a very active and successful day. Now let me hand back to Mark to take us through the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Can we just, if there are any quick questions
sure.
to you at
Yeah,
this point,
more than happy to.
A couple of quick questions, if there is any at this point, about this kind of the overarching theme of the today, or some. No, there's none. Okay, great.
Okay,
thank
good,
you very
thank
much.
you.
Okay, great. Fine. Okay, so now we're on to the main agenda, which is really to ask Jack Bower, who's a council member, really to give us some sort of understanding of what that entails. What is his role? So this is welcome to the stage, Jack Bower. Thank you very much.
Morning. So I'm Jack Boyer, and by my reason for being on the council is that I am an entrepreneur and CEO of a number of companies across various industries: automotive, telecommunications, advanced materials, even biotechnology, which is not strictly related to the work of the EPSRC, many of which have been either spin-outs or in other ways originated from the higher education sector, both in the UK as well as abroad. I'm more recently involved as a director of various companies, from early stage companies again, all the way to FTSE 250 companies, which is, I think, an important link in terms of the perspectives of the EPSRC to see the progression of technology, not just at the very early stages of pull-through, but also in later stages. I'm also involved with the council of one of the framework universities, one of the EPSRC's framework universities, and chair their technology transfer operation. So a deep symbiosis, a deep involvement with both the research as well as the pull-through of that. I've been a council member since 2011, and prior to that, I was in what used to be called the user panel. This was following a review of the advice streams to council. It was decided that the strategic advisory network would be created, and therefore the user panel was folded into that. But my involvement with EPSRC therefore goes back to about, by memory, 2008. So what did I want to bring to my involvement with council? And obviously a perspective that relates to early stage business and small and medium enterprises. And the definition of small and medium enterprises that I use is sort of more consistent with what would be considered small and medium enterprise, say, on the continent, where we're talking about companies not in tens of millions, but a few hundreds of millions of turnover. So to provide that sort of broader perspective. I also wanted to bring an international experience, which was given by the fact that not only had many of the companies that I've been involved with in the various areas I mentioned had an international footprint, but in many cases they also had a very deep involvement with the equivalent of research councils, if they can be called that, in different countries. So these will include the sort of national research institutes or the national institutes in say, the US, the equivalent of Fraunhofer's, not only in Germany, but say in Switzerland and in France and in Scandinavia and things like that, as well as in Asia, where various government funding agencies, whether in Taiwan or Japan or China, indeed, in smaller economies like Malaysia. And finally, I thought it was quite important to try to bring a cross-disciplinary thinking. This is something that is embedded in EPSRC, but which I've seen work very effectively in so many different contexts. And whether in the US with the creation of what I call these ecosystems. The Cambridge phenomenon is what's more known in the UK, but there are these ecosystems which incorporate higher education institutes and firms of all sizes and investment communities in a very symbiotic and a very effective way. And again, that's a bit of that thinking that I was hoping to bring to Council. So what do Council do? We have a formal responsibility, which is the EPSRC's Royal Charter. And just to excerpt from that says it's to promote and support high-quality, basic, strategic, and applied research and related postgraduate training in engineering and the physical sciences. So that's sort of a formal, fairly broad formal remit, and there's much more to that, as you can imagine. So what does that mean in practice? We help the Council, the Council helps to set the strategic direction that we're going to take. There's robust discussion on an ongoing basis. And we do so within the budget that we're allocated, as are the other research councils. We hold management to account. We are the ones who will ask the hard questions about performance and about budgets and about sticking to objectives. And we have, obviously, financial accountability, will fall into that. But there is a constant process of, the way I would sort of divide it between the show and tell part of it, which is tell us how things have gone, let's monitor the performance, and then the explore and discover part, as I think of it in my own mind, where the Council proactively thinks about the issues that we're going to need to address and how we're going to be able to really help the UK maintain a position of eminence. In terms of the operations, these are obviously delegated to the CEO, and so that is there's a very clear division between what the Council will do as an advisory body and the management team will do. I think it's also worth saying that the Council members are appointed for 4 years. Often, but not always, these are renewed for a further 4 years. What this really does is it provides a good overlap. It allows continuity, because there is a lot of knowledge that gets built up over the time of a Council membership that then gets transmitted in a fairly effective way. And you can see, as Paul mentioned, a number of the Council members are here today, and you can see all the biographies in the pack that you received. Now, our work is not limited to the Council meetings, not limited to those. And so examples of things that I've been involved in over time span a good spectrum. Anything from a digital economy strategy panel to I've chaired a Center for Innovative Manufacturing Awards, so the new centers in innovative manufacturing which have been awarded around the country. I've even chaired the equivalent of a Dragon's Den. You wouldn't naturally think that EPSRC would be involved in that sort of activity, but that sort of spans the thing. There are also peer review panels that the Council members are involved in. There's what I would call a sort of a broader remit, which is for us as members of the community, science community, business community, financial community, political community, to be aware and be able to feed back to the deliberations of Council the thinking that is going on out there. And it is a question of building relationships within our various communities so that we can bring the benefit of those contacts and those views and those opinions and those trends to the Council deliberations. And finally, there are issues of governance. So as I mentioned before, an example of that is I'm chairing something called the Council Effectiveness Review, which is an exercise where we are effectively looking at how well do we do our job, and how can we be even more effective in doing so. So it's as the Japanese would say, it's a process of Kaizen, a continuous improvement that we're undertaking there. Now, what do I value? What do I like about being a member? I'm hoping to contribute to the mission of developing excellent science and world-class scientists in the UK. It's at the core of our belief in excellence, always has been and always will be exactly what the EPSRC is going to be about. And it's devoting our energies to achieving that. And it's also competing in a world where there are economies and there are other research council equivalents who have enormous amounts of money that they can throw at the issues that we're thinking about. And to help use that money in the most tax effective way for the taxpayer, because it's widely acknowledged that the UK does punch well above its weight, and you all have the metrics that have shown that. But it is important that we are always on top of how it is that we can always make the best use of all the money, because it is an amount of money that can make a difference if well spent. So that's me. What I'm going to do is now pass over to my fellow council member, Dave Watson, who will give you a slightly different perspective on his activity.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for that, Jack. So he hasn't said everything that I could have said. So I work for IBM. I've worked for IBM for 30 years, of which probably 26 of those I spent doing something related to universities and collaboration. So I sit in this very odd place in IBM where I've got one foot in research, I've got one foot in a bit of product development, and I've got one foot somewhere else. And so it's more like Twister, really, than standing in one position. And that's given me some interesting insight over the years. I have lots of roles within my job, which actually I think help with regard to working on council. And I think council has helped me a great deal in my job as well. One of the things I have to do is to try and bring things through from research technologies all the way through to products. And occasionally that actually works, right? But it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So I know from first-hand experience how hard it is to go from theory all the way through to something which is in the products that others will make typically. And I have a bunch of people who in many cases could be employed in universities. I've got lots of people with PhDs from various places, various disciplines. And I think that this all sort of lends itself to why I wanted to get involved with the EPSRC several years ago, and what it's done for me, and as I say, hopefully what I've brought to EPSRC. I followed a route similar to Jack. I started out on the user panel in 2004. And one of the things I do know about EPSRC is if you stand still for too long, you'll get a job to do. And if you stay around long enough, you'll get more jobs to do. And there's occasions where I feel like I'm a sort of part-time employee in Swindon, because you get involved in so many different things. And over my time on the user panel, and I chaired the user panel for a while, and then since coming on council in 2009, I think I've seen most bits of EPSRC now. So I was involved, so you might blame me for a lot of this, right? So I was involved in setting the strategic vision around delivering impact and shaping capability and developing leaders. I was involved, along with other council members, in looking at the implementation plan, the delivery plan. I've been involved in submissions to spending reviews. Indeed, I'm on a subcommittee now looking at the current input to the current set of spending reviews. I've been involved with looking at peer review. I don't think there's much left, really, that I've not got involved in. But I think this is one of the big values of
council is it's not just turn up at 5 meetings a year, have a chat and go home, right? That wouldn't be very fulfilling for one thing, but also wouldn't be very useful to EPSRC as a whole. It's about getting involved, and it's about getting involved outside of the council business as well in normal day jobs. So I think you find all the council members have something of a similar perspective in terms of they're not just council members, they're not just people who do a job out in industry or in university or in government departments. Within those jobs, I think everybody has this link with research to varying degrees. And currently I have a big project that we run for the Ministry of Defence and the US Army Research Lab, which is quite interesting because it gives me an insight into how American government does things, or not, as the case may be at the moment. But that's given some other interesting perspectives that I've taken things that I've learned with EPSRC and applied them with them as well. So there's a good two-way street in all of this. I chaired the Digital Economy Advisory Board for RC UK, and I sit on Paul's behalf on David Willett's Information Economy Council, which is quite interesting as well. At the moment, I feel like the lone voice of postgraduate skills, right? Because there's an awful lot of attention paid in there to skills development, rightly so, but it does have the tendency to be very focused on skills in schools and undergraduate level. So, I'm the representative going, but there are postgrads here as well, and we need to think about how we develop leaders there, because a very high proportion of people who go through PhD programs funded by EPSRC, of course, end up in industry or government departments. They don't all become academics, so therefore it is a big provider of very highly skilled people. So it's an important part of the whole process. So I also sit on a number of other things. So this is the excitement we had yesterday, the Resource Audit Committee. So please just stay awake for long enough. It's not as dull as it sounds, honestly. This is a subcommittee of council that really looks at are the processes that we operate and the risks that we live with appropriate for a council of our complexity and our size. So it's a case of one of these jobs, someone has to do it. It's an important part of the whole process. And actually it's good that council has 4 members on this small committee, and then we've got auditors representation from the National Audit Office and internal audit, and 2 representatives who are, one is a current CFO of a university and the other one was recently a CFO of a university, is now working for an NHS trust. So they bring deep finance advice to it. We've got auditors who are very good at maintaining the stance that we need to take from an audit point of view for a non-departmental public body. And then the 4 council members ensuring that the focus doesn't drift off into audit for audit's sake, that everything is appropriate for what we do as a council in terms of being there to give out money to do research work. So it has an eye on a whole bunch of things. For example, one of the things we were looking at yesterday is the Archer project, the replacement for Hector. Right? And it's just keeping a watching brief to make sure that things don't go awry. Right? And if things do go awry, then the RAC has the duty to come back to council and alert council to this. So all of the process, for example, of moving the grants processing out of internal EPSRC process and people into the shared service centre was watched over by RAC and is continually watched over by RAC. So it's that type of thing. But it's best it's done by people who are in there. The other thing I'd just like to say a few words about before we hand it over to questions is the Strategic Advisory Network. Jack alluded to the user panel being folded into this. One of the reasons we did this, I was chair of the user panel, and John Fisher, who's sitting down here, was chair of the Technical Opportunities panel at the time. And we went through a period where we had many joint meetings between top and up. And we both felt, and many people who turned up to these meetings felt, that the joint meetings were better in many ways than the single meetings. And there was often the case for having separate meetings to focus on particular themes that weren't particularly relevant to the other body. But actually, when you were together, you got a different insight. Because although we had academic community representations on the user panel, it was dominated by people like Jack and I. So sometimes we were often missing a breadth of opinion from the community, and putting it all together into the SAN helped resolve that. And the SAN's a really important thing from Council's point of view, because it's the way in which we can draw advice to us. As a council member, you've got a number of sources of advice. You've got people that you're working with in your own job. You've got your friends that are in the community. You've got meetings that you attend and you hear people's opinions. You've got random things that come into your head, sometimes which are totally wrong. Right? So it does help to have this check and balance of a community of people who are focused on providing that stream of advice. And I think it's a really useful model to have the tentacles out into the community in this way. Yes, we've got the strategic advisory teams, but they're very focused on disciplines, whereas the SAN's more generally focused, a wider breadth, and a lot of different opinions come together for it. And in crafting little subgroups to go and do pieces of work and making sure that we've got a council member involved in that, it maintains this connectivity between council and the SAN, because the council member's job is to make sure that council are well informed about the opinions that were expressed in the SAN as well. So it's all part and parcel of the whole way in which council gets to the point of being able to make what hopefully are sensible and informed decisions. We're not sitting, it goes back to the whole thing, we don't just come to 5 meetings a year and make random decisions in a vacuum. We actually do get involved in a whole range of different things to at least attempt to make sure that we've heard a broad range of opinions. And the SAN is a really very important part of that. And so there's various work streams going on, and you can always quiz the EPSRC people and us during the rest of the day to look at the sorts of things that are going on. But here's just a couple of examples. I attended the meeting about the spending review, for example. And we're always asked to produce various scenarios by BIS. And it's really interesting to test the water about what those scenarios mean with people in the community. Because most of the time you find your views are not a million miles away as a council member to what the community would like to see or would accept in many ways. And it's interesting to get the community's view on some of we're always asked to produce quite extreme things. So it's interesting to find out what the community's view is about some of the extreme negatives as well as the extreme positives. And that helps us make, I think, better decisions that way. So it is a really important thing. I'd always urge people to get involved in those sorts of things. So I think that overall sums up the SAN. It does all of these things for us as council members. I don't think we could do without it, really. I think it's a vital part of the whole process. So that's all I have to say. And I happen to be the one who's standing up at the end, which is probably a bad thing, isn't it?
Well, we wanted to thank you very much. Yeah. You are an acronym king, I've realised.
Yeah, I am. I've worked for Acronym City all
Sand,
my
the land. So anyone got any questions about acronyms? But, apart from that, are there any questions for Jack or Dave at this point? No? Great. Well, that was very wide-ranging and very humane discussion of audit committees and other things, which I was very much, appreciative of, I must say. Okay, so that concludes essentially kind of those formal presentation sides of this morning. And now we're going to move over to essentially the main business today, which is this back and forth between questions and answers with the council. And we've got, as I was saying before, we basically asked people to send in their questions in advance, and we've got a list of them, and we've grouped them together into what seem like logical sets which address certain issues. And we really, I mean, there are lots of them, and we would like to get through as many as possible. So I'm going to, in a minute, invite the questioners to give their question. If they're in the room, I'm going to ask them to ask their question. If they've forgotten their question, I'll ask it for them. And then I'm going to invite whichever committee members want to answer the question. There might be one, or might be two or three. And just to say to the council members, if possible, could you keep your answers succinct and brief? Because actually that will help us get through many more questions, and I think that will be more beneficial for everybody. Without further ado, I want to start with the first question, which is by Helen Ellis. I'm sorry, is Helen here in the room? Helen, yes, you are going to kick off. And there's a
could you possibly remind me what my question was?
Yes. I could indeed remind you. Okay. So, a month ago, you were interested in this topic. How is EPSRC working with other research councils to prevent research falling between the councils? For instance, the medical engineering research. Are there any council members who'd like to start off with that? And if you could, yes, just stand up where you are and talk. There, that's right.
Oh, good morning, Helen, and thank you for the question. The answer really is that the research councils, in principle, all work together so that there would be a home for any research application. So there's no gap between the remits of the research councils. And that said, research is evolving very fast, so it may be difficult to know which research council you should submit your application to. And so really, if you would find yourself in that position, the guidance would be that the best thing to do would be to write a short outline of your proposal. It doesn't have to be extensive. A couple of pages is sufficient. It doesn't necessarily have to have full costings or references in it, but really an outline of your project idea and why it's novel. And then the EPSRC's remit group meets every couple of weeks, every 2 weeks, so they would look at your application, and if they would conclude that it would be better for another research council, then they would give you that guidance.
Actually, council members, when you first talk, if you could just briefly say who you are.
John Fisher from the University of Leeds. I think it's also useful to say that councils have cross-council initiatives and programmes. And in the challenge areas, for example, referring to medical engineering, there's a large challenge area around healthcare and healthcare technology. But EPSRC also works with medical charities. It's got joint programmes with British Heart Foundation, with the Wellcome Trust. They currently have something with the MRC and the Arthritis Research Council. So I think as well as putting in proposals, it's also worth young researchers looking at the overall landscape, and particularly these areas where there are dedicated calls into particular areas that are funded by a number of research councils, but also research councils, charities. And the same applies to other challenge areas such as energy and manufacturing.
So the second question is actually from someone who's not attending, Rebecca Shipley. In fact, is a colleague of mine at UCL Engineering, and in fact, a few doors down from me. So Rebecca, I hope you're tuning in your office. I am a new lecturer, which is true, she is, seeking input and advice on interdisciplinary research funding, e.g. at the interface of mathematical modelling and biology. Examples include career acceleration fellowships as well as responsive mode funding. I'm particularly interested in panel selection and the challenges associated with working across two disciplines. I think what she's saying is, how are the panels chosen? Are you feeling, well, how do you deal with cross-disciplinary work? Does anyone feel up to answering that from the council? I think we found...
So I hope you are tuned in, Rebecca, and a good question, and a question I would have asked when I was an early career researcher a few years ago. I think what's important is to recognise that many grants are now across disciplines. I think the data I have here is up to about 40% of research grants involve collaborations across disciplines. So it's not the norm, but it's increasing. So I think that's encouraging. I think on cross-disciplinary application, what's important is not just the panel membership, but the choice of referees. It's important to get reviews from a range of disciplines. And the role of the panel is actually more of a generalist role in terms of trying to take an overview of all the evidence that's before the panel. That's not just the proposal, but the referees' comments and the responses to the referees' comments. And I think what's important for cross-disciplinary proposals is to have panel members who have an understanding of cross-disciplinary working, who have a cross-disciplinary culture, and understand that in the cross-disciplinary space, people look at proposals through different lenses and have a greater diversity of opinions on them. And that's often reflected in the referees' comments. And I think what's needed in the panel, and that's why we encourage the diversity of the panels, is for people to take a broad view of those diverse opinions on cross-disciplinary proposals. So I think your question was perhaps hinting at perhaps the panels should have certain specificity of disciplines on them. I think I would suggest and encourage us as EPSRC to have panels, to have people who have cross-disciplinary perspectives and culture, and then they can look at the broad body of evidence that comes forward and compare the cross-disciplinary proposals with the single disciplinary proposals.
I know, just to follow up on that, I know that a lot of concern that people have is that the referees themselves are not approaching it as a cross-disciplinary proposal and as if it's a single disciplinary, and they sort of is there anything is there instructions given to referees when it's one of these cross-disciplinary things? Is it treated as differently? I don't know if anyone has any other comments on that front, or is it a known problem, or is it not seen to be a big issue?
I can speak personally as a cross-disciplinary researcher for many years. I think we recognise that when we have our grants reviewed, we have a greater diversity of opinions coming in, and sometimes a greater diversity of scores. And I think that's inevitable when you have people looking at it from different perspectives. I think it's important that the panels then take that on board when they're considering the responses from the referees and the responses to the referees' comments from the individual investigators as well. I think it's probably recognised as less of a problem now because I think we have more people with cross-disciplinary experience on panels. We have more people in the community with cross-disciplinary experience. But I do understand, particularly from early career researchers, that this can be perceived to be a problem.
Right, thank you. Anyone else? Dave, you want to have a quick word?
Sorry, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I shouldn't keep interrupting.
No, it's good. That's what you're here for.
No, sure. But can I add two points about that? I think one of the real strengths of the EPSRC's peer review mechanism is that we don't ask and we don't want the panels to re-referee. They are looking at the evidence they've received from the postal referee responses, and many of those may contain factual errors or a misunderstanding of the application that they've read. But you as applicants have the chance then to respond to those. And in fact, the thing that I'm sure, and those of you who've been on the panel will recognise this, the thing that panel really takes into account is the way you've responded to those referees' criticisms. Because if they are incorrect, then you have a chance to comment on that, to make a proper response, and the panel will then take that into account. The other thing I would say is that on the evidence, the statistical evidence that we've collected, interdisciplinary applications are just as likely to succeed as single discipline applications to panels, and we've got statistics to prove that. So if your interdisciplinary application failed, It wasn't because it was interdisciplinary. I won't
Okay.
say why it did fail though.
Most probably, we all look for something to blame, someone else to blame, and that's an easy one, isn't it? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to question 3, and this is by Stephanie Launois. Is that the right way to pronounce your name? No. Stephanie, is that Stephanie? No, not here. Okay, from Kent? Okay, well, I'll ask her question. One of the strong points of the last International Review for Mathematical Science was its geographic spread. Will EPSRC encourage this in the near future? Will EPSRC give the possibility for smaller groups to get large grants, such as platform grants or doctoral training centres? So I don't know if anyone on the council feels like having a go at that one. Yes? Okay.
I should say that they're ordered the questions, so I'll be sitting down in a few minutes and somebody else can answer. There's some data in terms of multi-institutional grants through mathematics, and I think currently 131 out of over 500 grants involve multi-institutions. So clearly we'd like that to increase if it's appropriate. I think the specific question was about engagement of smaller groups into larger grants, and I think generally what we've been seeing in the council, particularly when we've been looking at large grants such as programme grants and platform grants, certainly when I've been on panels reviewing submissions, many of those are now multi-institutional grants, and in fact very often to address a very large research challenge, it's necessary to draw expertise from many institutions. Just a personal perspective, I think, with respect to mathematics, I think there are more opportunities for the mathematics community in EPSRC space to work with other disciplines. So I think there we are looking at bringing in both multi-institutional applications, but also multidisciplinary, multi-institutional applications as well.
So the geographic spread that Stephanie mentions, is this something that EPSRC tries to maximise in any way? Or is it just excellence?
I mean clearly EPSRC funds excellence wherever the research excellence is. I think it's not just the international review, but also in past RF and RAE assessments, there's been a very good spread of mathematical sciences right across the country, and that's come through in the outcomes of those assessments. So that's a clear strength. That's a clear strength of the UK science community. What EPSRC has to do is to enable them to participate in the research funding programmes.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yeah.
So I think...
Anthony, if you could stand up, that would be great.
Anthony Finkelstein. So I think it needs to be clear that EPSRC is not a vehicle for regional policy. EPSRC is a vehicle for funding scientific excellence to the benefit of the UK, to the benefit of the UK as a whole. It's important that it recognises diversity, but that's scientific diversity rather than geographical distribution. On the other point, the specific larger grants programmes mentioned in the question are both grant programmes which are aimed at reinforcing larger platform-based strengths. And so inevitably, those instruments are tilted towards larger concentrations of expertise, for example, in doctoral training centres, where there are sufficient numbers of supervisors to support a larger cohort of doctoral students. But those are not the only instruments that EPSRC provides, nor the only instruments that provide larger amounts of funding.
Thank you. Okay, and on that note of diversity, that is the subject of the next question, which is by Helen Ellis. Sorry, that's just the way it's turned out, but here you are. This is great. Dan, do you remember this one? I can remind you, it's to do with gender inequality.
Yes. So I suppose this is around Athena Swan in particular, and obviously NHR in particular, have said now this is coming a requirement of the grants going forward. Is this something that EPSRC is looking to do in the future? Obviously, Wealth and Trust and others are making noises, and I know gender equality is something the council are particularly interested in. So I just kind of wanted some views and thoughts on it.
Gender inequality. Anyone want to start us off on this? Yeah.
Well, let me kick it off, and then I'll invite other council members and the executive to add more comments. I was remiss in not introducing myself. I'm Helen Neville, council member, and I work at Procter & Gamble. Diversity and equality are really important across all the research councils. And so for that, they've set up a joint central research careers and diversity unit. So that's being done centrally. And as part of that, they're setting expectations for grant recipients. So that would include, for example, requirements to engage staff at all levels for the promotion of diversity and equality, and that would include training, for example. And then a second part of it would be institutional sponsorship. So there are some institutions that receive additional funding from the EPSRC. Can be, for example, with a requirement on equipment sharing, but the funding can also be used and has been used by many institutions to promote diversity. For example, accelerating women into leadership programs or providing funding for people who are returning from career breaks. In addition, the EPSRC sponsors the Daphne Jackson scheme, which again is aimed to continue the progress of people who are returning from career breaks. And finally, at the council level, we're working to increase diversity on the board. So those are just 4 of the areas where we're working. And so I'll invite others to comment on those or to expand.
I'd just like to say a few words about what's happening in universities around Athena Swan initiatives, and that's, if you like, there's been a stronger emphasis on that since Sally Davies took it on board through NAHR, and clearly EPSRC are fully supportive of that. I mean, there's some evidence that STEM departments around the country are embracing that and receiving awards. I mean, there's some data about chemistry at Imperial receiving a gold award, University of Warwick receiving a silver award. I know in my university, University of Leeds, we have a silver award across our maths and physical sciences faculty. We have a bronze award in our engineering faculty. We have a bronze award in our School of Medicine. And though I'd like to think as Deputy Vice Chancellor we would be doing that without the incentive from the NAHR, we certainly accelerated what we're doing in that environment. I think it's important to recognise what Athena Swan is. It's about putting processes and procedures in place that are going to improve things over a period of time. So, and the awards are graded like that. And so I think it's about embedding improvement and continuous improvement in the organisation, and we'll see the benefits over a number of years' time.
Anyone else in council want to add something to this diversity? Also, I mean, I should have mentioned this earlier. If you need a follow-up question, someone else in the audience would like to add something or ask a follow-up question on this theme, that's also, of course, we'll bring the microphone to you. Does anyone else have any strong opinions on this or want to say anything? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm now going on to question 5. This is from Emma Tarama, who's from UCL. Is she here? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is this on the diversity topic?
Oh, it is. Okay, yeah.
It doesn't really help me. Remember, can you remind me?
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. Okay.
Maybe I'll have a follow-up.
It's you asked immediately a few months ago about the interest in early career fellowships across disciplinary research around this theme, and how the EPSRC is helping people, women in STEM careers, essentially. Is there policy relevant and impactful that can cross traditional boundaries? So now I guess it's sort of putting the two together, isn't it? Cross-disciplinary
And early career.
with diversity. So essentially, I suppose your point is that actually those two things together make it an even bigger challenge.
That's the point, exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Or three things together, early career, gender, and or diversity or equality, as well as cross-disciplinary work.
I'll say something.
Yeah. Anything that people haven't already mentioned before.
I'm still mic'd up. Number 4, I think, right? For the number 4. So I think the diversity one, I think we'll stick with what was said, because otherwise we'll just go down another set of things. On the cross-disciplinary work, I think it's important to realise the sort of overall structure that the research councils as a whole have in place, such that there are many challenge themes, and they're cross-cutting themes, so digital economy, LWEC, global uncertainties, those types of things. And they're all led by one council on behalf of all of the councils. So I think this is where, in many cases, we might all consider ourselves an EPS researcher, say, but actually the thing we want to work on is where EPS meets something that's managed by one of the other councils. And so LWEC's managed by NERC, Natural Environment Research Council. So therefore that's the source of information about that. It's the people, the program managers, all of that all happens within there. So I think that there is, in my experience, I don't think there's any negative things in terms of the chance of success in applying to one of the cross-council themes versus normal responsive mode. I think when you look at the figures, they're broadly similar. And in many ways, the cross-council themes are the things which support the most obvious multidisciplinary work. As I said when I was talking, I chaired the Digital Economy Advisory Board. And one of the things, there's two parts to that really. One of them was having an advisory board that was made up of lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. So they weren't all EPS people by any stretch of the imagination. And certainly I used to peddle this as the chair of, I don't want to fund the creation of a whole load of EPS widgets, right? And I think you'll find that in common with the chairs of all of these things and the drive that's given to the panels when they go to look at programs is to make sure that they do genuinely fund multidisciplinary work, not focus in on something that just sits within the managing council. Because it's very easy for that to happen. But certainly my experience of EPSRC with digital economy was that they didn't sort of home in on the EPS part of digital economy to the exclusion of multidisciplinary work or dominant work in another discipline, say. So things that were dominantly ESRC, because I think when you look at ESRC, you're often the place where policy most obviously comes out. And I think it's quite it's not an obvious thing to navigate, I accept, but I think it's a case of head for, if you're really, very keen on the multidisciplinary work, is head for those challenge themes that allow that work to take place and actually support that work as a sort of starting point.
I think
Emma's just going to come back on that, and then I'll come back to the two councillors.
If I can just sort of have a quick follow-up on that, because you mentioned the challenge themes. And I think I was talking to our research facilitators a little while back, kind of starting to maybe put together an application for one of those themes. And what we realized is that we don't know the outcomes. For some reason, it's not very transparent who's gotten them in the past. And we're just wondering why that is, because for a lot of the schemes, of course, you have sort of success rates that are openly available and you can review them. And for some reason, for these, they aren't open.
For which aren't open?
So for the cross, for instance, the living with environmental change and these fellowship schemes, it isn't clear what the success rate, for instance, is. And the facilitators didn't know, like they were quite aware of this, that we don't know what kind of chances we have.
Okay.
I can say what I knew about digital economy. I knew everything that that actually went through. I knew everything that had come in, really. And so I can't answer for any RC in LWEC, right? But the easy answer to me is the phone. You find out who the program manager is and you ring them up, because they do know.
Yeah.
And don't let them fool you that they don't, right?
Yes, it says, oh yeah, sorry, okay.
So it's not a complete answer, but it's a partial answer. EPSRC once a year publishes all success rates, including by cross-council programmes. So the LWEC success rate for EPSRC, for instance, was 41% last year. I can give you all those numbers, but please let's have a conversation. They are all in the public domain. And I'm surprised UCL research facilitators don't know, because most of them come from EPSRC. Let's have a discussion.
So yes, we've got to Dave and...
I think it's a very insightful question, and my observation bringing in the diversity and gender balance is that at some of these interfaces and some of these challenge areas where traditional STEM subjects are working with life sciences, are working with social sciences, actually we're getting a greater diversity of investigators in those consortia, and whether it be areas of sustainability around energy. We talked earlier about the health, technology, medical engineering interface, where there are actually big communities now that have a very good gender balance of close to 50-50. That is most unusual for an engineering or physical sciences discipline. And so I think, though perhaps not a deliberate outcome of those programs, I believe that the nature of them is helping us encourage young female academics and also students to enter engineering and physical sciences, which must be a good thing for the community.
Yep. Dave, wanted to do... Sure. Okay, Jeremy.
Jeremy Watson, I'm a council member. I just wanted to bring out another example, which is infrastructure business models, where there's a directly impactful relationship between ESRC and EPSRC in funding two substantial programs of understanding corporate behaviours about aggregating the value when you build infrastructure, so directly linked to the £2 billion investment the UK needs to make, and understanding from both a technical aspect, as in HS2 and similar things, and the way corporate behaviours work. Crossing those boundaries in a very relevant and impactful way. And I think once you start crossing those boundaries, particularly into social sciences, the gender balance starts to improve. And I think the outcomes of that programme, which has led to two consortia being formed, demonstrates that. I just wanted to demonstrate the evidence there.
And Anthony, yeah.
I just want to echo what John said about the many of the multidisciplinary programmes really having a much richer gender balance, to be honest, and a greater diversity than many of the core single disciplines that fall within our remit. But just because the facts are clearly not visible for some reason, even though we do publish them, the early career story is actually, I would say, really quite a success for EPSRC, and I knew there'd be a question, so we pulled together some stats. And so, since the beginning of 2010, the current spending review, we've spent 120 million on 400 researchers under 40. Now, that's our definition of young. But they're people who've never been a PI previously. So 400 new researchers, 120 million invested in them since the start of this current spending review. Since that period, we've backed 80 early career researchers with 50 million of funding to them directly, and an additional 4 million, which allows them to develop new lines of research, to take time out from their research and look at and explore at new areas. We're currently funding 100 first grants a year, and have done since the start of the decade. So for the last 10 years, we've been funding 100 new grants a year. So that's 1,000 researchers, new researchers that we've funded at a time when our funding actually has been falling. So we kept and maintained that early career funding despite an overall budget that's been dropping. We're now working with the Royal Society, as you know, to provide funding for URFs who are working in our strategically important areas, and together with them we've provided quite a significant amount of additional grant funding, 7 awards this year to Royal Society URFs, some additional funding to Dorothy Hodgkins Fellows. So the story is actually, I think, quite a successful one. It's probably not visible unless you pull all these statistics together, but we have been able to maintain the support of early career researchers despite an overall budget that's dropping.
Thank you. And Anthony, do you want to say something? Is that one working on your table?
This is really a brief observation to say that, of course, we also appreciate that diversity stretches beyond the issue of gender and covers other issues, most notably age. And I think that within EPSRC as a whole, we're conscious about the development of scientific career structures from early career all the way through to experienced scientists. And I personally believe that in the context of interdisciplinary work, it is diversity across the entire age spectrum that will be critical in enabling that work to progress.
Can I just ask the audience here if there's any follow-up questions on those responses? I wonder if I could just do a quick poll about the website, because there is a huge amount on the EPSRC website. I mean, we all search it all the time. and sometimes I know that I have found a page which I think is particularly useful, and then I'll literally go back the next day and I can't find it again. This is my fault, I know. But can I just ask the audience whether they find the website and all the stats and all these things, as you say, all the feedback from all the grants, because they're all on there as far as I know. Do you find that easy to navigate? Is there issues around that in terms of, does anyone have any comments about it? Everyone love it? I'll take silence as that you all love it. Okay, brilliant. It's just me. All right, as in so many things. Okay, Helen, yes, it's you again. We've got you down here about the Concordat for research integrity. Do you want me to read it? It says, what is EPSRC looking for?
Yes, very good. I suppose, obviously, we all know about Concordats, recently been introduced. This year, we're looking towards working towards compliance. There's been some RCUK questions to provide some examples of what are going to be looked for in the monitoring visits. But I suppose there's been some concern around how people are being trained in terms of actually assessing compliance with the Concordat, and also
who's been trained? I mean,
well, the RCUK people who usually come down to audit are being asked to look at how they're complying with the Concordat also in terms of that, rather than just looking at audit. So how are we training these people to actually do that? And obviously the Concordat is quite a fuzzy document, to say the least. Will there be more questions from RCUK generally? Obviously we've had some, and it seems to focus around misconduct in particular, but will there be further information coming out?
Right, okay. Thank you very much. The Concordat and EPSRC. John, Dave? I don't know if anyone has a comment to make about this. Oh. Yes. Okay, great.
Okay, I'm Matty Emmett. I'm the Director of Strategy and Business Relationships, but I was also responsible for the EPSRC input onto that Concordat. And it's not just in relation to that Concordat, but most of the sort of frameworks that we have. The approach we take is to effectively not investigate specific incidents, but to look at the control frameworks that the universities have. So the questions that you can expect from our internal audit team, which actually is the group who will also look at this, would be around the control frameworks that the universities have. They are all qualified internal auditors. They are all qualified at looking at control frameworks and aspects of that. They are not researchers in that respect, because of course a lot of the detail of what would be expected here would be around the processes that you have in place in order to investigate incidents and things like that.
Given the success of the demand management policy in reducing the number of proposals being submitted to EPSRC, is it time to review the policy in its current form?
Okay, so this is demand management policy. Who would like to comment on that from the council? Yes, John.
So Dave Watson earlier said that he was one of the council members that helped introduce demand management, but I'll have a first go at responding. I think there's been ever increasing applications over many years to EPSRC, and I think we all know that the peer review system works when we're able to support a certain number of grants that come into the system. So when there's a very high demand and low success rate, the process that's been so successful for funding science over a long time in the UK gets under pressure. So there's something about protecting the process. So I think that's the first thing to recognise, and was one of the motivations for introducing it when there was a constraint on the amount of funding available. When it started, there were, I've got some numbers here, a reasonably high number of individuals restricted, but now actually the number restricted by demand management is quite low. It's as small as 16, I think. So there's an evidence that the community and the system is responding to it. I think it's an interesting question. What is the demand? I mean, the demand is more than just the demand of putting the applications in. The demand is the time and resources in the universities to support those applications. The demand is the demand on EPSRC and other research councils to process them. The demand is the demand on the peer review community to review those large numbers of applications. And of course, we know when the demand is very high, sometimes the quality or the response rates for peer review go down as well. So this is about protecting, I think, the quality of the peer review system. I think that there's a very explicit point, is it time to review the policy in its current form? I think the answer is, at the present time, not. And we believe that what has been introduced has been an effective intervention. And of course, we all know that the success rates have gone up to what we consider to be a reasonable level.
Thank you. Are there any other comments about demand management policy or comments from the council? Okay, go on. Yeah.
So I think it's interesting to cast your mind back to why we put this in place and what effect it immediately had. There are something like 10,000 eligible people, if you like, eligible in the sense of anybody's eligible. A man in the street can put an application in if he wishes to, right? But in terms of EPS academics, there's about 10,000 in the UK. And they go back to what we try to do overall from EPSRC is go after supporting excellent research. So what we were faced with was our target is to fund excellence, yet we still had a very small number of people who were always coming in at the bottom end in prioritization panels. You know, the peer reviews weren't great, and they were coming in at the bottom end. Now, there can be lots of reasons for that, but on the other hand, it's incumbent on us to make sure that the system that EPSRC operates effectively and efficiently. And it isn't really efficient if we've got a set of continual proposals coming in. And what we were trying to do, and we discussed this with a number of the framework universities, and we sent message, if you like, to the universities, was, can you please mentor your people a little more to try and raise the quality of the submissions? Because really that's what this is all about. It's named demand management, but actually it's to try and drive the quality up of the submissions. And the fact that there's now only 16 people, I think it is, that are affected by a temporary restriction, I think is a it's quite a reasonable thing when you look at that 16 out of maybe 10,000 and over £800 million a year's worth of money. So I can't, and I can't speak for all of council here, but I think they'll probably nod. I can't see us looking at that again with any detail in council, because we're still able to do what we set out to do, which is support excellent research. And I don't think there's any really compelling reason to go back and look at it again.
Thanks. Paul, is that a good, did you want to talk about that? If you want to...
Sorry. I just wanted to raise it because you probably all hear of anecdotal evidence of early stage researchers being put off putting in research grants in case that it reaches the bottom 50% and it's a black mark against them. And obviously demand management is working, but I was just wondering if there was any appetite to finesse it somewhat in order to not put off the early career researchers who obviously want to put in new, innovative ideas, and they don't have a track record of doing so.
Are there stats for this? Does anyone have any? Dave?
Can I just answer that? First of all, you talk about a perception, and it is a perception. We've got no evidence that early career researchers are being put off, and I quoted the statistics on the number of early career researchers who we've successfully funded over the last decade, and there's no indication that there's any drop-off at all. We've also, when we put the demand management process in place, we looked at the statistics of people who were successful or who were going to be affected by the demand management processes that we put in place. The early career people were actually more successful than the mid-career people. There was no evidence that, in fact, putting in applications as an early career researcher was acting to the detriment. They were, in fact, more successful. So at the moment, there is no evidence, and we are watching this very carefully, that it has caused any withdrawal of applications from early career researchers. If there is evidence, we would do something about it. But at the moment, it's an anecdote, which is actually, from what we can see, untrue.
Thank you. And the next question is from John Lowe from Warwick. I don't know if he's here. Yes or no? No. But actually involved exactly the same point, which was about first grant applications and whether there is a perception, which you've already talked about, Dave, about perhaps that this is not, it is a perception, that they aren't very hard to get these days, that the success rate is going down. I don't know if you did mention the success rate last time, but do you have that?
No, I didn't answer that, but the success rate on first grants is 30%, or over 30% now. So in fact, it's not significantly different from what is now the average success rate given the demand management processes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Islam Sahaya from Northumbria University, is she here? No. Okay. Islam, I hope you're at home or at your office looking at this broadcast. Here's her question. What information and support can be given to someone who is early career researcher and has no experience with EPSRC? I don't know if anyone wants to kind of give someone a kind of tutorial on what to do to apply to EPSRC, but that would be very helpful. I'm sure lots of people watching this will. Richard?
This is Richard Friend.
If you could stand up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Council member. I think the short answer is that there's a lot of stuff on the website about how to apply to grants, and of course the second answer is that you should go and talk to someone who's got one already, which is probably easy in the majority of institutions, but not all of them. But I think the message that I keep hearing about chimes with my own experience is that if you phone someone out at EPSRC, the response is always very positive and very helpful. So in some sense, there's a sort of a little bit easy remarks to make, but I think they're supported by evidence.
Great, thank you very much. I think there's been various comments already today about that, and phoning up EPSRC is always a very good place to start. I must say that I get very good advice from people at the end of the phone. It's a very human organisation, and that's really to be applauded. Okay, so Paul, did you want to say something else? Add something else? Sorry.
This is not an answer to the question, but I think picking up the phone is the best thing. I think one of the things that EPSRC, probably the other councils to an extent, but certainly EPSRC has suffered from, is that because our admin budget has been cut, and cut quite drastically and will continue to be cut, the number of times that our staff can actually go out and interact with with researchers in universities has diminished. And I think that's been to the real detriment both of EPSRC and of the researchers out there in the university. We used to go out regularly doing mock panels. We do far more visits than we do at the moment. The reality is we don't have the resource for doing that. What we need are other mechanisms which replace what was really an informal way of working with the community, which had phenomenal benefits. And if you have recommendations as to how we can do that, but with a very much reduced staffing level, might be called resource, but it's staffing level, then we would really want to take those on board, because we are aware that we've lost something in having our staff reduced, and we need to find an alternative way of doing it. And there are probably good ways of using social media to replace at least some of that activity. But we're open to suggestions and would really welcome them.
Thank you. Again, is there any further follow-up? Yes.
Is this still working? Number 2, I think it was. Okay. If I can just add to that, we really, really would like your feedback in a number of these areas, because quite often it is perceptions rather than sort of evidence-based, but perception is reality to the individual concerned. And I think we do fall into the trap, and I deliberately kept my mouth closed when you asked about our website. We put an enormous amount of information on the website, so a lot of the evidence is there, but I can't find it, so I'm not expecting you to find it. So, advice to us in terms of how we better engage, advice to us in areas where perceptions are building and you think an intervention is required would be really, really helpful, because on a couple of the recent questions, I've had that same question asked as I've been around universities. So there are perceptions out there that actually are not based on evidence, but we haven't managed to engage sufficiently to communicate that fact. So any advice and help you can give us is really, really welcome.
So question at the back over there, yeah, or response?
So let me give you some feedback.
Yeah. If you could say who you are and your affiliation, that'd be great.
Yes. My name's Andreas Cipriano. I'm from the University of Bath. I'm a mathematician. I think within mathematics, we struggle a lot with EPSRC because in particular with regard to perceptions, there's a lot of incentives like digital economy that EPSRC puts forward. And this is often misunderstood by our community as we're blocked out from funding, in effect. A very good example of this was on the fellowship scheme, where you did actually block out about 80 to 90% of mathematicians by insisting that only statistics and applied probability people working in that field could put forward proposals. That's since been changed due to an outcry in the community. But I mean, the result of that was a perception that EPSRC are not prepared to engage with mathematicians, pure mathematicians, for example, because of that heavy emphasis on probability and applied statistics in the fellowship scheme, only in the fellowship scheme. And also the issue of impact as well, I think, has created a misconception amongst mathematicians that they will never be able to make a convincing case because impact is something very, very difficult to put forward if you're a pure mathematician. Now, in fact, my experience with EPSRC is that it's the pure mathematicians who get funded, because what happens is it's peer reviewed. And the community of mathematicians enjoy and can easily spot good mathematics. They can see through elaborate impact statements and they home in on the science, on the mathematics. So actually what's happening is there is a perception in mathematics that fundamental theoretical mathematics is not getting funded, when in fact I think it is.
Thank you. That was a comment, but I don't know if there want to be, if anyone on council wants to comment back. Continue the discussion. Yes, go on. If you could just use the mic, that'd be great. The microphone, sorry. Yeah.
Was this?
Yeah, it should be on. He'll switch it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, use it if you can. Okay.
So I've been on council for 5 years, and I can honestly stand to you and say that about the only subject that gets universal, we're not going to do anything that consciously damages the funding for it, is mathematics. I'm not a mathematician, right? I'm an IT guy. And the number of times that I've sat in council meetings where we've said, we will not reduce the funding in maths because it's a fundamental. It underpins everything. And that is the only thing really that ever comes up like that. Sorry to all you physicists and chemists and all the rest of you. But I think it does need to be reinforced, right? It's not under any form of restraint or attack or anything like this. And just one comment about what sometimes happens, right, in terms of point views of how funding comes through. There's this concept of yearly expenditure and long-term commitment. So if you start looking at EPSRC in years ahead, there's an awful lot of pre-committed spending because people hold 5-year grants, 3-year grants, 2-year grants, whatever they are. And in any one year, things can appear good or bad, depending on your perspective, right? And quite often it's because, and I know I'm going to get shot for saying this because there'll be something that'll come out and it'll be wrong. Quite often a bad year in one discipline's view is because there's been some good years leading up to it. And there's an ebb and flow in terms of funding. So it's very hard sometimes to make a decision or get a considered view, if you like, about the overall funding in an area simply by looking at announcements in one particular short time frame. I know that's not a complete explanation for statistics and probability fellowships, right? But I think I just urge everybody when you're looking at it to try and look at the overall picture rather than what just happens in the years as well, because it's a pretty complicated picture in terms of the overall funding, where it's over a, say, 3 or 5 year period the money is actually gone. And it is the cause of quite a lot of consternation. I think, I'm not saying it's a bad thing within the community, because I can see why it's difficult to get to those sorts of levels of detail, but that is another thing that we can help with, because we can dig at the numbers behind and explain why it is the way it is. But certainly maths does get a huge amount of support. Sorry to everyone else that I said, well, what about physics?
Can I just respond to that? I'm not saying that we don't get support. The short version of what I was gabbling on about was that, let's say it's a shame that the number of EPSRC visits out to universities is not as good, as much as you would like it to be, because I think mathematics would benefit from that because of the misconceptions. As I said, pure maths does get funded, but there is a very, very strong perception, and there's a lot of apathy, also with young people, that there's no point in applying. How could I ever write an impact statement? But that's not relevant. That isn't relevant. And somebody needs to get that message across.
I think impact is really interesting, because I'm on one of the REF panels, and actually REF have done quite an extensive piece of work about what constitutes impact. So I'm on a panel really to look at impact statements. And I think there's a quick explanation of impact that people often run to, which is is it going to have some economic benefit? Is someone going to be able to found a company and employ 20,000 people as a result of this piece of work? And it's a very easy conclusion to be drawn to. But actually, one of the key things that we keep telling people as a council is EPS, the impact of EPS is in just about everything else. Quite often these pieces of research underpin something else. And we need, or the council needs, quite a lot of stories of impact, right? Quite a lot of it in terms of the ability of one discipline to move their science on because of the work of another discipline. And that's why I say a lot of pure maths underpins a huge amount of other science. Right?
That's academic impact, though.
Well, but it's still impact, right?
But the pathways to impact section is not academic impact.
It's any impact.
Well, as my understanding is that you're guided away from writing about academic impact on the impact statement.
Can I just
what the tone of that is.
Can I bring in one of our council members just to kind of flesh out that?
Anne Anderson, EPSRC Council. EPSRC has made a point of saying that impact includes impact on other academic disciplines, very much as Dave Watson has pointed out, because in communities like mathematics, that's a fundamental element that we want people to think about. And the Pathways to Impact statement is a process to encourage the applicants to think about potential impacts of their work, very broadly defined. I think this is a really interesting dialogue that we're having, and I think it follows on from Dave Delpy's point. Given the constraints of how often EPSRC staff can visit, and as we know, mathematics is a very dispersed community, we need better ways of feeding these messages back. And I think your point, which underlines Council's absolute commitment that excellent work will get funded by EPSRC, and that's what we're primarily, fundamentally and universally interested in. But of course we want colleagues to think about potential impacts of their work. So I think it's that dialogue that we need to engage in, and it's really helpful to have this discussion. Could I also just pick up one other thing, and it's a topic that we have thought about in Council. You used the language mathematics being blocked out, and I had one of my mathematical colleagues come and visit me at the University of Glasgow and use exactly that language. So in a very personal sense, I was aware of the concerns of the community, but some of these schemes are not about blocking communities out, but about encouraging activities where traditionally there's been less activity. And I think in the first round of the restriction of the fellowships, it wasn't about blocking out, it was trying to encourage a particular kind of community to come forward. So I think it's part of that dialogue, and as Dave Delpy has said, given we can't do as much of the face-to-face visits, how do we get those general messages out? And it's really good you're here telling us both sides of that picture. Excellent Maths does get funded, and we need to get those messages over to the community more broadly.
Could I, did you have any other questions or comments? Sorry, over there, yes. Would you, if you'd like just to wait for the microphone, or in fact, if you could just take this microphone. In fact, don't worry, we've got one up here. If you could just introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Thank you. Laura Vaughan from UCL. Just as a suggestion, you've been asking for suggestions about how to manage the fact that staff from EPSRC are less able to get out to universities. I think this morning's Q&A, which I think has been very useful, could be replicated more frequently across the year, either to have, as it were, open surgeries, so the EPSRC staff can literally say, we're now opening up a Q&A broadcast on the internet for people to send in their questions, so whether they are in Northumbria or in London, or Swindon indeed, they can ask those questions and everyone can learn from their answers, but also to have perhaps focused surgeries on a particular field, such as mathematics or whatever, so that also people from that field can start to engage with each other and see what the emerging questions are in that area. So just a suggestion to go back to you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, suggestions along that theme of trying to increase the communication between the council and its constituency? No. Great. Well, thank you very much for that. That was a really good discussion. The next question is by Paul Clark, but I'll read it out because I've got a feeling that you have no idea what it was. But it's a good question. It's a really good question. I think it's going to echo in lots of people's minds. Are there any plans to review the ban on applying for PhD studentships on responsive mode grants? I know a lot of my colleagues answer the same thing on a basically hourly basis. So anyone from the council would like to have a go at that one? Richard? Yes.
I hope, is the microphone working this time?
It just takes a while for it to switch. Should be okay. Keep going.
So I keep working. Okay, it's come to life.
Yeah.
Well, the short answer is it's kept under review. It's a policy which was introduced before I came onto the council. So and I have to say I wasn't one of those who was happy about it when I wasn't on the council. There are a number of things to say. One is that there's a huge amount of support that does go into students, about 9,000 a year. There's a lot of money going into the Centres for Doctoral Training. Of course, interviews are later this month, shortly. You can have views as to whether you love Centres for Doctoral Training or not. It probably depends on whether you think you're going to get funded. But one of the virtues they have is that they have provided prima facie evidence that there is industrial support for our student training programme, and one shouldn't gainsay that. The fact that the testing of external interest and real commitment for these Centres for Doctoral Training is very visible is one of the things that helps us as a community, as a council, make the case that EPS science and engineering is relevant and contributes directly to the economy. So that's a strong case for CDTs. Going back to project students, the short answer is that studentships are training and not quite the same thing as research. That's the official line. The conversations that I've been party to, sort of in and out of the council, are that is probably too broad a brush. That there are some areas, probably more towards engineering, where that may be an appropriate designation, but particularly as you wander back, am I allowed to say mathematics again, then the role of the PhD as the sort of unit of the doing of research is more evident. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be pressed ahead, and we need to check that whatever flexibility there is in the DTG, the sort of core funding, whether that is providing what is needed or not, that needs to be checked. But I would say that project students are sort of part of the business of EPSRC, making sure that the students are able to do the projects that would benefit both their training and the economy.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, I think I was nominated as the other speaker on this, and as an industrialist, I can speak warmly with respect to the success, I think, of the previous IDCs and DTCs and the value they've provided in tangible input to the economy through trained doctoral researchers. And there are some interesting figures that, with respect to the current round of bids, there's been a tremendous take-up, as you'll be aware. So 365 in the first call, whittled down to 177, and then that will come down to a little bit less than half, perhaps, in the final accounting. And the other metric I think that's really important is the degree of industrial support that has been received from those bidders from the academics. So in total, the sort of contributions from other sources that we're looking at is sort of around about the £500 million mark, I think, on this paper. So obviously not all that will be available because we're further whittling down, but it's been tremendous buy-in by industry. It's definitely something that industry recognises, and from my experience, the people who come out of these doctoral training the courses where they work in a collegiate way actually are directly applicable to industry in many cases. They have certain management skills, transferable skills, as well as their deep personal research topic. And so I think there's been no loss of research quality, but there has been a direct impact from these new schemes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Anthony.
So I'm aware that there's been controversy around this this decision, and certainly that's been voiced very vigorously in, among others, the computer science community, which I'm most familiar with. But I think a hard point has to be made back, which is that institutions are in receipt of DTP, and that they actually have got the facility to allocate DTP in ways appropriate to the receipt of project funding. So when people look at trying to associate doctoral training with strong threads of research in their institution, that is a discussion they need to be having also internally with their own VP research.
Thank you. Any comments on that? Anyone want to come back on that? PhD studentships? No. Okay. Oh, yes, Dave.
Let me just add a couple of facts. When Council made this decision to drop project studentships, it was when we were setting budgets, and we were in fact spending an enormous percentage of the research budget on project studentships. And every studentship that was funded from the research budget meant an RA post that was not funded from the research budget. So Council decided that it would up the proportion of its budget that it would spend on PhDs from 20 to 25%, and that's what we're currently doing. And we, as Richard said, we've got about 9,300 students currently on our books through the Doctoral Training I was going to say Doctoral Training Grant. I still think of DTGs and CDTs. But by stopping the project studentships, we've now, in effect, returned 600 postdoc posts to the research base. And one of our responsibilities is not just to train people, but to ensure that we've got, across the whole landscape, a career path. And with an enormous number of PhD students on projects being funded off the research line, there was an enormous cliff edge between being a PhD student and getting a postdoc post, because the postdoc posts were disappearing. We have a responsibility to ensure that we've got a really successful landscape of career prospects across the whole remit. That's why Council, in the end, dropped project studentships, but it also increased the total spend on studentships to 25% and 10% on fellowships. So 35% of our budget is spent on training in one form or another.
Thank you very much. There's a response to that at the back there. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry to be the problematic.
No, this is what it's for.
Actually, just a couple of questions about CDTs. I mean, one of the effects of the first round of CDTs was you had a huge coagulation of students, certainly in my field, in fewer universities, which meant that the excellent expertise that we have in this country was not being put to best use in terms of student training around the country. There were because of these large centres which were drawing in a lot of the current cohorts of students. It meant that was also drying up some of the PhD applications in other places. So there's a question about that. And the other question is, an EPSRC 4-year, I appreciate that CDT is a training grant rather than just a PhD grant, but a 4-year PhD would typically cost around £75,000. If I happen to have seen a few costings for the current round of CDTs, and they can vary. I mean, this is a bit cheeky what I'm saying, and I'll explain why in a minute. They can vary per student anywhere between £120,000 to £250,000 per student. The reason for that is because of the industrial money that comes into it, so that sounds great, right? But it can also be because of management costs and travelling between two sites. Right? So there's a balance there between, value for money in terms of the added value you get from the extra money. But there is still that ambiguity that a 4-year PhD studentship is 75k, and the figures, when you just divvy up the cost of a CDT by 50, a typical number of students, there's quite a discrepancy.
Is that a question? Is there
Remarks/question.
It's a remarks. Basically, you're saying, is it value for money? I think you're saying. That's the question, is it? Does anyone want to?
Yes, both geographically and financially.
Right. Okay. I mean, I think we dealt with the geographical question before, which is if the EPSRC is funding excellence. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
I'd better, I suppose, answer that with some statistics. I don't recognise the £250,000 per student, I must admit, not on the data that I've got here. The first thing I would remark on is the four-year PhD. Every international review of subjects that we did over the last 5 to 7 years, and possibly the last decade, has consistently said the 3-year PhD, classic British PhD, was no longer internationally competitive. And that's why we made a very specific commitment to drive a 4-year PhD. Also, in areas of strategic importance, and that's where we put our CDT money, there is a real benefit, both from industry and from the size of the programs, of the challenges that are being tackled, from having a critical mass of people, and that's not just students, but also a critical mass of supervisors. So there is, in some areas, a real need and a real benefit from having critical mass. Geography, as Dave said, we don't have a geographic remit. We'll fund excellence where it is, but we do identify areas of strategic importance for the CDTs. The majority of our funding doesn't go in CDTs, it goes in DTPs. More than half of our PhD funding is not CDTs. It goes elsewhere, and therefore we're not distorting, I would say, significantly the research base. Finally, we only fund 40% of the engineering and physical sciences PhDs in the country. So the other 60% are still there. I don't recognise this picture that somehow by putting less than half of our funding into CDTs, we've decimated the country's ability to have studentships across the rest of the remit, wherever that excellence lies.
Thank you very much. We've only got a few more minutes before lunch. Oh, did you want to come back on that? Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, if I could, I'd like to agree with Richard that there is a misconception between the academic communities and EPSRC on training versus research in PhD students. And I think, well, my own department, I think probably about 85% of the last RAE submissions and REF submissions this year will have PhD students as primary authors on those submissions. So, as I personally don't see the difference between training and research. Yes, we use PhD students to do high quality research, internationally leading research, as shown by REF submissions, but they are also being trained at the same time. You raised the point about PDRAs and the gentleman back there about the cost of PhD students. It is a lot cheaper to do research with a PhD student than a PDRA. And sometimes, earlier responsive mode, studentship grants, people were encouraged to apply for the unit of resource that they thought was most applicable to solving the particular problem that they wished to address. And so I don't quite see the link up between the current policy and the position that we were at.
Okay, John, let's do this.
Maybe just one last comment on CDTs, because to my mind they start to square the circle. I think there is a demand for people doing PhDs to produce the highest quality research, and the evidence is there in the REF. There's also a demand in the EPSRC space to provide high-level skills, and I think we heard earlier that 70 to 80% of our PhD students will end up working outside academia. From my perspective, a CDT provides the opportunity to both do very high-quality research, but also provides the breadth of training and skills that's needed for our PhDs to go out and work outside academia.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any last questions on this point? or comments? Yes, one down here, and then we'll have to call it a day on this.
Andrew Blake here. Yes, good. Andrew Blake, I'm a council member. I also run a research lab in the UK. I must say I'm very much an enthusiast for CTTs, because I think when you look internationally, much of the strongest programs for PhDs include a structured element and a cohort element. And I think having both structured education as part of the program and being with a substantial cohort are of enormous value to students, and produce someone at the end who is stronger and more able to take that kind of work forward.
Thank you. So we've come to the end of the question time this morning. There is a space at the end to revisit some of these issues. Often if you're like me, halfway through the afternoon, I suddenly have a killer question. So what I want to do is if you have such a question, there will be a space right at the end to do some of that. But I'm really keen that anyone who sent in a question, and we haven't already got to it, will have a chance as well to answer that. I just wanted to get a sense in the room of who is here who sent in a question and hasn't yet had it raised. If you could just raise your hand, just so I know where we are with that, and then we can... So in fact, we've covered everyone in the room. Okay, great. So that means that at the end, if there are any questions that arise because of the poster sessions or the surgery sessions, or you just ruminating on lunch on what's already been said, we can revisit these issues right at the end. So all it's left to do this morning to say is to remind you that what we're going to do next is we're going to go next door. You got about 20... Oh, we're staying in here. Downstairs, sorry. We're going downstairs. There's lunch provided. We've got initial 15 or 20 minutes just to kind of get the initial pangahuns satisfied. But then we want to encourage you to take your lunch, maybe a second helping, into the poster sessions, which are in adjoining rooms, or into the surgery sessions. And your badge, as I said before, your badge, the colour tells you where you should go on your first session, and then the number is the second session, and there will be people downstairs, EPSRC people downstairs, who will help you and corral you, and all that sort of things, and help you to lunch and to drinks. And so, having said that, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who's spoken this morning. Thank you to all. Thank you to all back in your offices and homes, and we'll reconvene later this afternoon. Thank you. Yeah. Hello, everybody, again. Welcome back. I hope, well, lunch was great, wasn't it? Lunch was really fantastic. And I think the discussions downstairs seemed to be going really well. So I hope everyone felt that they got the ability to ask the questions they wanted to ask, and to get some of the discussions going that they were interested in talking through. Before I hand over to Dave Delby to give us a kind of forward-looking address, I would just like to see if there's some things that have come up as a result of the discussions and the poster sessions and the surgeries downstairs that you wanted to talk more widely about. Because it's very rare to have all the council members here available to chat, and so this is an opportunity to raise things which you wouldn't otherwise have such an opportunity to do. So has anyone got any burning questions that have come out either of this morning's session, so as I was saying, questions that have suddenly occurred to you as a result of what we talked about this morning, or as a result of the discussions after lunch? I don't think anyone wants to, or any council members who've suddenly realised that there are some burning issues that need discussing. Yes? If I can get a mic to you, great. And if you could just say who you are.
I'm Ronan McGrath from the University of Liverpool. Thanks for the opportunity to come today. It was a great event. And I think one thing that emerged for me was just the real importance of communication with EPSRC on many levels. And as such, I was disappointed today that there wasn't any indication of a response to the review of the strategic advisory routes. I think you're going to be discussing it tonight, but my university would very much welcome some steer on what EPSRC's take on that is going to be.
Is this working? Yeah. Thanks for that. And in fact, we expected that question to come up this morning, and we didn't quite get there before lunch got in the way. So let me answer it now. I commissioned the independent review, as you know. The review team reported back to council in July. We published their report, which as a council we welcomed. What we've been doing since then is to work out the detailed implementation, how we can implement the various ideas and topics they came up with. That work has gone on and is being reported back to council this evening, and then we aim to publish a full response to that at the end of this month. But as we've already welcomed the findings of that review, the vast majority of their ideas will be put into practice. The issue is just how we do it and how quickly we can do it. So I think a very positive response to the review, and an intention to follow through quite quickly. Does that answer?
It does, and I think just for what it's worth, my own take is that events like this around communication are worth 1,000 web pages.
Look, I absolutely agree with that. I said to a couple of people, I can't navigate our website, so I'm not sure how anybody else can. We tend to put a lot of data on it, which is quite right, but that is not communication, and it certainly isn't engagement. And I think events like today are all about engagement, where we can get a two-way dialogue going. And sometimes we're just miscommunicating, that we're not necessarily disagreeing about some things, but we just haven't got the language right to really align. So, look, we will have, I'm sure, an energetic discussion this evening. We'll publish at the end of this month, and then the next review, which is looking at the peer review process, will report to council in December, and I envisage a very similar process there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other sort of broad questions people want to bring up, or do you want to? Yeah.
Julia King, council member. I sort of felt, having my colleagues had all done such hard work this morning, I was feeling rather guilty, so perhaps I should say a couple of things. One thing's from some very interesting conversations I've had with people this afternoon. What came through very strongly to me, which is I think something we've been worried about on council, is really, I think, the impact of the cuts on what's called the admin budget on communications and feedback. I mean, some absolutely passionate comments about how when EPSRC staff used to be able to come out and talk to us, an hour getting people round and chatting to them was worth, any number of millions of pages on the website, and how do we get back to something a bit more like that? But also from one of our strategic partners, one of the companies who partners with us, something to say, yes, they'd had some interesting meetings with the EPSRC, but they felt they didn't have any feedback as to how their inputs were actually used or how they made a difference. And so right across the spectrum, that sort of issue of we have got to tackle this problem of how do we get back to doing the real contact with people. And as we said this morning, people's ideas about how we might do that are very much appreciated. But I think we've got a lot more thinking to do about that. And it links into a website that is much more user-friendly and accessible, because although you weren't prepared to say to Mark when he said he couldn't find his way around it, you were in more discreet discussions all prepared to say that it had loads of stuff and you couldn't find your way around. But I think I should say to the EPSRC team, we also had somebody from the Wellcome Trust on our table who said, the EPSRC is the easiest research organisation for us to collaborate with of any, and wouldn't we like the others to be like EPSRC? You are so flexible and friendly. And also, many of the academics said, when you ring them up, they're absolutely super. And somehow we have to get that message to people that you can ring them up. It isn't just a faceless form. It does have a telephone number. That telephone number does work, and it has somebody on the end who says, if I don't know, I'll find out for you and ring you back. So we've got to get that message across. So please go out and tell your communities that there is a person on the end of that phone number, and they're really nice, and they will help. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's very, very important, I think. I mean, that's definitely my experience, is that I've never, ever phoned EPSRC and not had someone pick up the phone who is extremely helpful, and if the person I'm trying to get hold of has not been there, I've gotten their phone back. So I have to say the phone stuff is really, really brilliant, and it's a very human organisation, which is right and proper science engineering, very human, and I think that's all of our experience, the reason we're here to get today. So if people are happy with having a sense to wrap up this sort of the questions and now to move on to the future, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Professor David Delpy, who is going to give us a vision of what's going to happen next. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. My briefing for the vision was just to thank everybody and say, have a safe journey home. So let me just mention a couple of other things before I come to that. First of all, I'd like to just echo everything that Julia's just said. One of the things that's been great about this meeting, apart from a sort of rather stulted start, but really got into it, was that chance to engage on a one-to-one basis with many of you, and hopefully through the live feeds to a wider audience. We do need to find other ways of doing this that are cost-effective in terms of manpower, and there have been some suggestions that have been made to us, which I think we will definitely follow up on. Perhaps regional meetings with live feeds and live questions that we could do with relatively small numbers of staff and small numbers of council members attending. But we'll take those ideas back. If you have any other suggestions, pick up the phone or email us, because we do want to try and build on what we've had in the way of a very successful event today. In terms of looking forward, what we'll obviously do is Council will, when it meets at 4:30, I think it is, reflect on the event today anyhow. We'll take that back and then we will write a formal summary note of the event, and that will appear somewhere on our website, no doubt. By the way, I was just as an anecdote, I was actually looking for somebody to contact at the University of Liverpool. I couldn't find anything on their website. It was sheer chance, but there are others that are equally bad. Anyhow, so we will issue a summary note. Please continue to feed in the comments. Before I come to thank yous, let me just talk a little bit about the thing that is exercising us all, of course, at the moment, which is the 2015-16 spending review. You're all aware that in June, BIS were given an overall budget, and the research budget was ring-fenced. Now, that's the overall research budget, not just research councils, lots of others. But following that ring-fencing of a £4.6 billion research budget, the councils, having worked cooperatively to try to preserve that ring-fenced budget, switched into competitive mode and... Oh. Sorry, let me just stop that. Somebody's given me the answer, yes. Sorry about that. So it's the only time it's rung all day. Anyhow, we switched into competitive mode and have put in bids to BIS for a series of scenarios. And I mean, I don't think it's a secret to say that those 5 scenarios that all research councils have been asked to put a business case and a plan for comprise, in essence, flat cash, a rolling forward of the existing budget, and that means, in reality, minus 3% given inflation, but also a plus 5 and a plus 10% budget, and a minus 5 and a minus 10% budget. And those bids have gone in. BIS are now considering them, and sometime before the end of the year, we will get an answer from John O'Reilly and David Willits as to what our individual research council budgets are. I would argue that, and we've very strongly argued, that if you really want the UK's economy to grow, then you've got to invest in engineering and physical sciences. They are the underpinning disciplines which enable all the rest of the economy to thrive. We still have time, I think, to influence that discussion and argument. And so as a consequence, we are continuing to expect and hope that you will advocate for us, that you will be continuing to feed to us outcome-based stories. It's all right to make the argument, and I think, to be honest, Treasury, the Prime Minister, David Willetts, all understand that research is a long-term thing, that if you invest now, then there will be benefits 10, 20, 30, 50 years down the line. But when you're actually competing with somebody who's saying, well, we'll cure cancer next year, for the 50th time, we need to say what engineering and physical sciences is doing for the economy, for the country now, as a result of what we invested in 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. And the only people who can tell us those stories are you, the academic base. We can remember the grants that we gave, but we don't necessarily get linked into the stories, the outcomes of that research. And often, of course, there's a long and tortuous path between the bit of basic research we funded 15 years ago and what actually developed as a product or a service or some advice to government as a result of that work. So we really do need your continued support in providing those stories and in you advocating at every possible opportunity for engineering and physical sciences. I expect our budget will be known round about the end of the year. There's an autumn statement on the 4th of December, and so my guess is it will be before then or at the same time as the autumn statement. Anyhow, that's where we are. That's the big thing that's keeping us busy at the moment. We'll be talking about it at Council. I just really want to finally thank everybody for their contribution today, and for those who submitted questions, even if you were here and forgot what the question was. I can't remember what I did last week, never mind a month ago. And those who were not here, who hopefully, whose questions we hopefully read out and answered. I need to thank Mark especially for his facilitation and both the EPSRC staff and the Royal Academy of Engineering staff who have really, I think, hosted us extremely well in an extremely well organised event. But thank you for your contributions. Continue to put them in. Ring us, email us, and have a safe journey home. Thank you very much indeed. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So that's the end, everyone. Just to say, just to reiterate, thank you to all of you coming, and thanks for the council members for making your time so available and being so forthright and for being so, discursive. Just like to thank Karen Manning and Claire Lane, Joe Enderby, and Adrian Paul, of course, and Kathy Bailey, who came in at the last moment to really help us out from the organising side of things, done so much work, so much for preparing all this for all of us. Of course, the Royal Academy of Engineering and the EPSRC staff, and of course our cameramen and AV people, and last but not least, people who made a delicious lunch. Anyway, thanks everyone. See you next time.